Okay, and welcome back. I'm going to take a walk on the Twilight Zone time tonight. This is going to be a really unique and perhaps unforgettable program for many of you. This information really has been sitting dormant for the most part, that which you will hear about this evening, for about, almost 8 years now. And just by way of a little background, before I introduce our two guests, let me read a little bit. This is very interesting. This is an essay written by Dr. Michael Salla, Ph.D., extraordinarily talented man, whom I think many of you know. He's been on the program for many years, off and on. Written May 21st, 2010. I'll just read a little bit of this. Michael writes, an expose has appeared on a prominent internet forum that claims a U.S. Navy officer, we'll call him Source A, divulging information about covert operation involving extraterrestrial life and secret UN discussions on UFOs is a fraud. One of the founders of Reality Uncovered, Stephen Broadbent, used photographs from a recent Navy New York luncheon involving Admiral Gary Ruffhead, Chief of Naval Operations no less, to out the officer. After further internet research, Broadbent goes on to conclude, quote, we have found evidence that shows that Source A hasn't worked for the military since at least 2001. Now this is 2010, remember, but possibly much earlier than that. Among the implications of Broadbent's expose and outing of Source A is that the alleged February 2008 United Nations discussions on UFOs never took place, and that a secret Navy extraterrestrial liaison program is fictitious. Well, the problem, writes Michael Salla, is that the same source Broadbent uses to finally confirm the outing of the officer in question, a retired Navy scientist, undermines his alleged expose. Conveniently, Broadbent ignores key questions that arise from the outing that lead to a contrary conclusion to his expose. Let me continue a little bit. According to the scientist involved, Dr. Bruce Maccabee, the officer in question, Source A, had high security clearances in order to be able to visit him unescorted at a high security naval facility in 2008. Well, this gets better. This is what Maccabee had to say in a 2009 interview about a meeting he had with Source A in 2008. He wrote, first of all, I work at a Navy laboratory at the time that he visited me. I think it was April 2008. In a Navy laboratory, in order to get in, you had to have credentials. You had to have clearances, a badge that would allow you to come in, and even if you could get in, you might still need an escort if you didn't have a sufficiently high clearance. An escort. Well, Source A came right to my office without any escort, which tells me he had the credentials. He gave me a review of all the things he had done over the years, and it certainly looked real. At the very least, he was able to go right through the security of the laboratory and came right up to my desk. I told him how to get to the office, and he did it. So here we have a respected senior Navy scientist, Dr. Bruce Maccabee, confirming that Source A had genuine credentials and a very high security clearance, as well to enable him to enter the facility unescorted. All that Broadbent refers to is that Dr. Maccabee confirmed the officer's identity, and that was somehow the final nail in the coffin, that his claims were all a hoax. It is disingenuous, writes Dr. Michael Salla, to use respected authorities such as Dr. Maccabee to out someone, but to totally ignore his testimony when it is contrary to the expose that Broadbent was pursuing. And I will stop there. Our guests tonight are extraordinary people. They have been dark, as it were, on insistence and request of various very high-ranking people for the last nearly 8 years now. They are the Pickerings, the Pickering boys, as Jim Marrs used to call them when we'd talk. The Pickering brothers, more formally. Shawn and Clay Pickering are two researchers and investigators from New York City. The brothers were very good friends, as I mentioned, to our mutually passed-on colleague, gentleman Jim Marrs, who left us in August. To the Pickerings, Jim was the eminence grise on all topics that most mainstream authors shy away from. In other words, we're talking extraterrestrials, remote viewing, the JFK assassination, which Jim personally investigated for 53 years, the occult, and much more. In fact, Jim was one of the very few people that the Pickerings confided in regarding their investigation into the Navy's black program dealing with extraterrestrials between the years 2006 and 2012. Jim Marrs was fortunate to have met the Pickerings, Navy source, in person in New York City, and on 2 occasions talked privately with that source, Source A, about his experiences. Jim, toward the end of his life, truly believed that there was another classified program the Navy was engaged in regarding extraterrestrials. Perhaps tonight, after 7 years and more, staying off the radar, in which the Pickerings promised his Navy source and an admiral to keep very quiet, they might shed a little bit more light on the recent AATIP confirmation of UFO UAPs, which we heard about, a $22 million Pentagon program. And yes, if you're wondering, Jimmy Marrs knew everything. And with that, let me welcome to the program Clay and Shawn Pickering. Gentlemen, are you there?
Yes, we are.
All right. First, Clay, hello. And yes, we got you both loud and clear. Clay, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Oh, you're welcome. What I'd like to do tonight, Jeff, to make it easier for you, is that I'll try to say Clay here and Shawn will say Shawn here, so there's no confusion. And I just want to make sure you're not getting any bad feedback because we're in the same room together. Are you hearing us loud and clear?
No, you're good. And Shawn, welcome.
Oh, welcome. It's a pleasure. After being a long-time listener, it's an honor to be on your show.
Well, thank you. Here's what we need to do. Clay, if you're on speakerphone, if one of you is, we're getting that secondary audio looping back in the other's phone. So if you can go to direct audio, if you're on speaker, that might help. If not, maybe get a little bit further apart. There's a little bit of a feedback. Okay. Shawn, say something else to me here. How's the weather in New York?
Well, the last week or so, it was brutally cold, but it's moderated a little bit. It's like New England weather, you know?
Yeah. Okay, we're still getting that loop. Clay, tell me something. Yeah,
so he's actually going to move into another room.
Okay.
Make it easier.
Jeff, can you hear me a little bit better? Is there any feedback?
Yeah, Clay, you're fine. Shawn?
Yeah.
Okay, you're good now. All right, we got it.
Okay, yeah.
When you're in arm's distance or in the same room, that'll often happen no matter what.
Yeah, we figured that might be the case.
Those darned iPhones. Yeah. Okay, now, the introduction I laid out was, I think, certainly bare bones, but it was enough to give our listeners an idea of the directions we're going to go in tonight, although we have much more to do than just what I talked about. But that Bruce Maccabee story, as relayed by Michael Sala, was very important. That's a big deal. Shawn, your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. You know, when we were going through this process, it was a constant cross-examination of our sources' information, only because of the extraordinary nature of it. So when you've got Richard meeting Bruce Maccabee in that facility, able to get in with his own credentials, unescorted, it spoke volumes. I mean, I was always, Clay too, but I was really always looking to get, I'd cross-examine him, I would ask him questions, say in May, and I would ask the same questions in July. And if I got the exact same answer, the probability is that, it's the old Al Pacino, Glengarry Glen Ross line. Always tell the truth. It's the easiest thing to remember.
Sure. No, I think the only person who could have walked into Dr. Maccabee's facility like that unescorted, if it was a fake, would have been Fox Mulder.
We actually,
hey, Jeff,
Clay and I actually...
Go ahead, Clay.
Yeah, I was just going to say something. So we'll try to stop the crosstalk as best as we can. But what's interesting, what people fail to realize, aside from our source getting into, our Navy source getting into the Dahlgren Naval Weapons Research Facility, is that he had to pull orders to do it.
Very good. There's another point.
That's very important to understand that. Very important to understand that. So
he didn't just
Jeff, you had a question.
Yeah, he didn't just walk in on a lark. Okay, all right.
Not there.
How did you two first meet, Jim? That's a big story in and of itself. Of course, one of the truly great men of our times, and I say that with all humility. And of all the people I've known in this business for over a quarter century, next June, Jim is unequaled in his uniqueness, his brilliance, his kindness, and just an extraordinary man. How did you guys meet him? Shawn, go first.
Well, we met him at the X conference in 2005. We were part of Disclosure Network New York, which basically was born out of the disclosure hearings that the disclosure information that Greer came out in 2001.
Dr. Stephen Greer, yeah.
Correct. So we, a bunch of us went to the X conference, and Clay and I walked into the place, and we see Mars, and we sit down, and we start chatting with him, and next thing you know, we were drinking beers, and Linda Howell comes by, and we're all sitting there, and we're, just getting to know each other. And then for the next 2 days, we spent a lot of time with Jim, and we had a great time. It culminated in the part of the ceremony section of the conference, and Jim was a little lit up, and he was having a lot of fun, and he was busting people's chops, heckling, but everybody knew it.
And the thing about Jim,
I love Jim,
and I was not able to be around him at these conferences, but I hear nothing but the same thing. He just dazzled people. They couldn't. He was like being around the sun. You want to be around that brightness and that warmth and that mirth. Just an absolutely unique combination of humankind.
Yeah, I mean, well, Jim also was very generous too. He put Clay and I in the forward section, the credit section of his book, The Rise of the Fifth Reich. Clay, help me out.
I think Fourth Reich.
Fourth Reich. And Jim said, no, I'm going to put you guys in there. You help me out with some of the research. And I was very kind. He's one of the few people that ever did that.
Oh, very generous. Absolutely. Clay, tell us about that first meeting with Jim.
Oh, yeah, Jim. It's, it's interesting is that, what was it? I think it was a function that towards the end of the X conference where everybody gets together and Stephen Bassett gets up and talks and gets a chance to express his views on what the paradigm research that he's doing and the particular type of movement that he's pushing for. So anyhow, Jim sat with us, Linda sat with us, and if you've got to correct me, you might know his name, C.V. Scott. Very interesting man. He was in the Navy. He kind of made his way over and sat with us at the table.
Mm-hmm.
So anyhow, knowing Jim, and we already had a few in us, right? So Linda looked over and rolled her eyes, and she goes, "Oh God, Jim's drinking beers again." So I got a big chuckle, but it was nothing mean-spirited with Jim. It's just Jim. Jim is just a happy-go-lucky guy, and
he was not.
We spent a lot of time getting to know each other.
Clay, he was an absolute pro because the night before we were up till 2:00 in the morning, right? And the next day he had a very early lecture, and Jim pulled it off flawlessly. It was amazing.
Oh, he was. See, people can drink and not be drunk. It's just part of their life. That was Jeff's part of the package, and it was something that was not excessive. He was never sloppy to the extent that he caused anything to malfunction in his brain or his intellect. He was brilliant. I mean, I don't know how many hours on the air we did here, and always just on top of his game. Always.
Yeah, and also very generous, Jeff. Very generous with his time, because people would walk up to him in the X conference, and he would invariably pull him off the side and spend a half hour with the person, people he didn't even know. So Jim was very, very generous with his time. Very open person.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because I don't know how many conversations we had off the air, but he would say, "Oh, I got to go do this radio show," or "I got to go do this or that," and he was not feeling well later on. And I said, "Jim, it's okay to say no, especially if you've got a radio program where there, maybe 10 people listening. It's okay not to give 3 hours of your life to that. You have important things to do, and people will understand. You've done this for a long time," and I would just caution him that, please, it's okay to say no once in a while politely. You're not going to hurt anybody. But he never wanted to do that. He always wanted to please. Always.
It's Clay here, Jeff.
Yeah.
It's interesting is I'd end up calling Jim up. It'd be some various other things on research and topics, and Jim would be in a hurry. Well, the next thing you know, we're on the phone for an hour, and Jim would say, "Geez, we just did a radio interview."
Right. That's right.
I got a kick out of that. But he would always, we'd spend time. We always interested each other, and I can tell you a time when he came to New York, and this is when he first met our Navy source, and he got out of a cab, and he's clear across an avenue, and I'm watching Jim. And I'm saying, Jim's got to get out of the street. He doesn't realize these people will just run you over in New York City, right? So I yell, "Hey, Mars, get out of the street!" And he raised his fist up to me and shook it at me. And I said, "Typical Mars." I said, "Hey, watch it when you cross the street. You'll keep going if they."
He just went straight across.
Oh yeah,
Jim had that old school. Jim had that old school responsibility. You talk about doing the interview. Jim, it's okay. You don't have to do the interview. Well, he had that old school responsibility. And the only other person I really found that in that I was really close to was Ted Gunderson.
No, yeah.
Ted was the same way. He could not. He always took someone's call.
Mm-hmm.
He always did the radio program. And I said, "Ted," he goes, "I'm just tired of fighting World War III." But that same old school responsibility that I think is so missing today.
Every time he was on this program, he always, in addition to just being here, he put himself out. You could hear it in his voice. He did. Just like Jim. He would put himself the extra mile every time. Very interesting.
The other guy, too, that's interesting you guys brought that up, Jeff, sorry, is the other guy that I found that had that same quality, where you could call him up and you could talk about anything. Was very interesting, man. Was General Ben Parton.
Yeah.
And actually, that's where I met Parton. Shawn and I both met him. Was at that 2005 XCon, and I introduced myself. I knew his research, especially with the Oklahoma City bombing. I got to know Ben very, very well. We talked at length about some of the dangers that were involved with he and his late wife at the time. His wife died a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
God rest her soul, wonderful woman. And so Ben was the type of person, just like Jim and Ted, who you ask the question, if you're competent enough to present it properly, he would stay on the phone for you. And there was a guy that was spent 1 year with Project Blue Book. I'm not sure very many people are aware of that.
No,
So that was very fascinating.
DV Kid introduced me to General Parton, and he was on the program a number of times. And exactly that, very special. And I would give anything if I had known about Project Blue Book. We concentrated on the OKC bombing and other things. And then he became ill and was not able to do radio anymore and passed on. But an extraordinary mind. Yeah, just like Ted Gunderson.
Yeah.
And
what's interesting is we got Ted together with General Parton. Help me out, Clay. Deborah Simon was there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no,
we went
Deborah
to,
Simon.
Don Grand Prai's ranch. We had a seminar there on 9/11.
Wow. Yeah.
We had, and, it was, I think, Webb Harpley was supposed to be there, and he didn't show up. And he says, "Geez, I'd like to be a fly on the wall." But there was Eustace Mullins was there. We got him there. Ted Gunderson, Deborah Simon, General Ben Parton, Colonel Don de Grand Prix. It was really interesting. It was one heck of a. We had a couple of professors.
That's wild. Now you mentioned Eustace. I knew Eustace very well on the phone, but you get to know someone over time. And toward the end, he wanted his books out. He wanted them published. That was his number one prime directive. And he knew they were closing in on him. People who didn't want his books out there. He actually gave me, this is not a boast, it's just a fact. He gave me full rights to all of his books. They were all in a garage. And he said, "Jeff, the only thing I want is for you to promise you'll publish them." And I said, "You got it." And the next thing we knew, he was involved in some very strange circumstances, and I was never able to get back to him like he used to be. But there's another brilliant mind.
He was
Clay and I were very close to Eustace.
Attention. Well, yeah. Let me tell Jeff this. Not only were we close, but I've been in that damn warehouse down in Madison, Virginia.
All right.
Helping him move books.
Okay.
And I've been in his home, and so I got to know Eustace, got to know his research, and those damn guys, you got to watch out for them. They get you drunk and get you snookered, and next thing you know, you're 6 feet under.
Yeah.
The typical Eustace fashion. But we were in Madison. That's when we got together with the Colonel, and we talked for hours and hours. We had Eustace up here in New York City to lecture.
That's
and he
great.
was at that point.
Great.
He'd already been somewhat incapacitated. He was down in, I guess, Texas. They put him in a facility, and according to Jesse, his good friend, they basically, he had I don't know if it had a meltdown or he was drugged or
something
lobotomy.
Something very nefarious happened. But for all of you listening, these names, Eustace Mullins, Eustace, Eustace Mullins. You want to go look up YouTube videos. You want to look at them talking. Lieutenant General Ben Parton, Partin, absolutely, and Ted Gunderson. And by all means, find as many Jim Morris presentations as you can at these conferences and enjoy and learn. They're all extraordinary people. Let's take a little break. We'll come right back with the Pickering brothers and continue a very extraordinary conversation. And we're back with the Pickerings. And Jim, I always would, sometimes the phone would ring in the afternoon, and I'd pick it up and, "Hello?" He said, "Hi, Jeffy." And we'd be off and running. And he'd go and go. He just loved to talk. And one thing about Eustace, now you knew him much better than I did, but I got the distinct feeling from him, he knew the things were closing up around him. He knew. I don't know how. He didn't say by name what was happening, but he knew his time was running short, that the enemy, was going to make a move to try and stop him or shut him down somehow. I don't know if that works for you, but that's what I felt.
Well, I could tell. This is Clay here.
Go ahead, Clay.
Eustace. I always got the sense that he had a feeling that based on his research, he had woken up a lot of people. And I'd like to remind people too, and Eustace told us that certain agency had, really, really done a job beating up his father outside the supermarket in which he worked at. And part of because of Eustace's research and going after the Federal Reserve and going after money and going after.
Oh, he went after the untouchables, boy. Yeah.
Oh boy, did he! Today with the internet, the information highway, that's not revolutionary because we're seeing a lot being played out. We're starting to see the man behind the curtain. But during this time, during the analog era, his books reached quite a few people, and his research and his lectures. And I agree with you, Jeff. I think that at the towards the end of his career, end of his life, is that I think he was a little bit fearful. I think he kind of knew the writing was on the wall.
Yeah. You can, all of you who are members of the archives here, which go back to 24 years, you can go back and find Eustace Mullins, General Parton, all the people we've been talking about, and especially Jim Mars, hundreds of programs. They're all there, and they're fun, and they're timeless. So, okay, let's move to source A. How did you get involved with this issue? And we're not going to fully identify the man. There's no real need to do that right now. We can call him by his first name if you want, but
that's fine.
Let's call him Rich then, okay? Rich, all right.
Yep,
so Rich or Richard, how did he come into your lives? What was it that you got wind of and began to pursue that led you down this rabbit hole? And what a strange and unique one it is.
Clay, you do a good job on this. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's actually at the place I worked at, I managed a bar in New York City. And without naming where the place is, which the trollers had never found yet, after they had searched high and low to find out where I worked.
Wow.
There was a gentleman walking down in his navy whites, and I saw him walk by, and I noticed he was an older gentleman, and had the rank of lieutenant commander. And I said, sir, would you like to come in and have a beer on behalf of our establishment? And I would like to thank you for your service. And he stopped, looked me in the eye, and said, "Don't mind if I do." So
it was Fleet Week.
I got to. Yeah, it was May of 2006 Fleet Week, and boy, Jeff, I can't tell you enough. I think Shawn, did we hit lotto? Man, did we meet one of the few people who really has a lot of autonomy in the black world. And by the way, we didn't know this until about 2012, how much autonomy he had.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of those decisions, aside from his working group, is that he could make that. And he had power over that, except that he had to make sure he abide by the rules when it came to classified information. And we've learned some other things which we won't get into in terms of that. But, so I invited him in. I sat him down. We got a chance to discuss a little bit about his background, going back to Vietnam. And ladies and gentlemen, for those who do not think he served, he did serve. He served in Vietnam, and he was one of the team leaders, I think as a lieutenant, that had to put down, I believe it was the DARPA sensors on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and then subsequently had to go back and pick them up. And
wow.
As Shawn pointed out, is he had to go back and pick them up because the Paris Peace Accords were happening,
mm-hmm.
and there couldn't be any evidence of our involvement behind into Laos and the Ho Chi Minh Line and a lot of things. So he had to go pick them back up, and he got his Bronze Star there. So he is Old Navy. He told me he started his stint in the black world, essentially from Vietnam. I don't think he was quite a good boy in Vietnam. I think Shawn would agree with me. And so, and I mean that, I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just that a lot of liberties were taken taken when people came back from the war.
What a lunatic asylum Vietnam was. How could you come back and be straight arrow? I don't see it's possible.
Well, he actually
it's funny you say that, Jeff. I just want to interject, Clay. I just want to interject one thing. It's funny you say that because when Brokaw said the greatest generation, the World War II, Rich would get very upset. He said, "Yeah, you come back after Vietnam, after the crud you had to go through," and he would get very upset.
Yeah, understandable, and I hear exactly what you're saying.
It was very visceral. So he actually spent some time in a Thai jail. When he was in the service. It's not. I think was it a Thai jail? I'm pretty sure it was a Thai jail. I'm pretty sure. But anyhow, he got in trouble, and when you get in trouble, that goes on a little resume, and that's used as leverage. And that's how I think I've mentioned this in a very, very private call to you, just that's how control is used with people in very sensitive programs.
You bet, absolutely.
That's how it's done, guys. Hey, listen, there is no white knights in this, and we never said that our guy was a white knight. But I want to be very clear: this is a very, very good man, a very honorable man. So we have to look at history and realize the time that our servicemen or men and women, whether in government, there's a whole different outlook on how people conduct themselves. It didn't mean that they conduct themselves like animals, but they were gentlemen, and especially in the service, and they believed in duty, honor, and country in every sense of the word. So,
not like that anymore, Clay.
No, it's the people we have great men and women in the military and in the intelligence community,
and then we have those others
around. Yep. Oh yeah. There's always that sect in there, and that's the control. And that's a great segue. Let me bring this up to you. In Eustace Mullen's book, Curse of Canaan, there's an excellent passage in there by William Sullivan in his book called The Bureau regarding Charles Winstead, I believe the man who shot John Dillinger. And in that book, The Bureau, he quotes John Winstead as saying, in politics, if they find someone's corrupt, they put you in politics. If they find you're in politics and corrupt, they promote you.
Oh, well said. That's and the way you used to talk was so, in a way, invigorating, astonishing, and soothing. He had this remarkable demeanor about him. I don't know how he came up with it, but that was him. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, it's that southern quality of, I call it the southern statesman. He was an art form in himself.
Yep.
But just not to digress on that, I wanted to share that with you. So anyhow, I got into a chance to speak with Rich about his Navy days. So we talked a lot about Vietnam, and then I brought up. He asked me what my interests, and I said, "Hey, listen, I'm very interested in the phenomena, the UFO phenomena, and extraterrestrial hypothesis, and everything, all the recruitments that come along with it. And boy, are there a lot of recruitments." But so he was he kind of studied me, and he said, "Okay." I said, "Hey, I'd like you to meet my brother, Shawn." He said, "Would you be willing to do that? Or do you live in New York?" He goes, "Yes, I do." He said, "Sure." I says, "I tell you what, I got to go away for a couple of weeks." And at that time, he was in the reserves. So he was doing time in Washington, D.C. Am I correct, Shawn? I think I am. Correct me, Shawn, if my timeline's off. But
what year, Clay? What year would this have been? This meeting year?
2000, May of 2006.
Okay.
First meeting. So anyhow, so 2 weeks later, Shawn came in and we started discussing the phenomena, and he gave us the original Psalm 101 documents, original. They were copies from a particular book, and we saw that, and we presented that, and the people at Open Mind said that was a copy from an original copy. However, the copy that we gave, that our source gave us, had certain editing differences that Dr. Bob Wood looked at and said, "Hey, there's slight differences in the editing process, which made it in itself somewhat unique." So Bob had done an analysis of that, which we found interesting. But that's neither here nor there. that document is very, very real. If it was written in crayon, Jeff, it wouldn't matter. It's the substance and the context of what's in that Psalm 101 that's very, very important. So
when you're saying Psalm 101, define that for our listeners just a little bit more.
It's Special Operations 1-01.
Okay.
Here, I'll read it to you. I have it here. It's extraterrestrial entities and technology recovery and disposal. Okay, and it's Psalm 1-01. That's exactly what it says. I have it here.
You know, what Clay is saying is SOM, Psalm, all right?
Right.
So I want everyone to understand that. It's not PSALM, all right? It's Psalm.
Yeah, it means actually Special Operations Manual.
Right.
Okay? And so it's I have a reproduction here with the same type of tan color, which is consistent with some of the other Special Operations Manual that was given out in Vietnam, and I have a copy of that on special warfare, which is it's exactly the same. So I actually got that copy from Rich, and so in comparison, I said, okay, all right, there's something to this. Even
Clay,
though we were aware of
how we got Clay. Do you want to get into how we got that document?
Yeah, how did he get the Psalm document?
I'll let go ahead,
Shawn.
Talk about that, John.
Rich had been involved in monitoring tests out of China Lake. Specifically, what was the weapon system? It was Tomahawk, Clay?
Yeah, they were firing Tomahawks from Point Magoo in California. They were still in the experimental phase. At that time, they were using what do they call that old ping system? You know, you got to find the ping when the ping gets louder, it means you're getting closer. I forget the.
I can verify that's quite true. I lived in Santa Barbara then, and I remember there was scant messaging of it in the media, but there were reports of these advanced missiles being fired from Point Magoo out to the China Lake desert area. It was very interesting.
Yep. Go ahead,
so Rich was tasked to. There was one missile that just kept on going. And so they were tasked to go find the missile. So it was Richard and two other servicemen that were with him, and they got in the Jeep and they took off, and they traveled, and next thing you know, they're in the middle of the desert. They're not really quite sure where they are. They know they're out of state, so they were in Nevada, in the middle of basically the whole area, 51 type area.
Tonopah, 51. Okay, yeah,
Jeff, you hit the nail on the head because I said that to Rich. I said Tonopah. He didn't neither confirm nor denied.
Right.
So that's where he was at. I'm pretty sure.
Sure.
So they kept on traveling, and finally the ping's getting closer, but they really can't find it because it's so dark. So they said, well, let's just bed down on top of the hood of the Jeep, and in the morning when it gets light, we'll find it. So they bed down, and no sooner, within an hour, they look up and they see this gigantic triangular craft go over them. So the two servicemen who were lesser rank kind of freaked out, and Rich says, no, it's ours. See, because look at the blinking lights. It's ours.
Well, he said port light and red light, right? So the port and starboard lights, the green and red.
So they had FAA green and red lights. All right, that's what.
Yeah.
All right.
So
got it.
Next thing you know, they're surrounded by security.
Wow.
And they get taken in. What was the exact facility? Was it? Where did they exactly take them place?
Well, first of all, keep in mind that at that time, I don't know, some fighters overflew their position, and then I think it was Blackhawks later came in immediately right after, knew that the area was compromised. But they were taken to the Area 51 facility. That's where they were taken, where the interrogation process took place with Rich and the two Marines. Go ahead, Shawn.
And so. Rich would not admit what he saw, so they used interrogation techniques, one of which was drugs. And so even when he was as high as a kite, they say, okay, they actually had a picture of Richard pointing up as the craft went over. He said, that's you. And Richard was like, wow, that kind of looks like me. He was just high.
So every square inch is covered. They don't miss a thing out there.
By the way, I want to just throw a caveat in there very quickly so that we understand when Rich's interrogation, he was taught in obviously anti-interrogation techniques,
right.
And he said that training took place at Fort Lewis in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to be very clear. So here we have an example of someone who knows where they teach what would happen during interrogation.
Right.
Go ahead.
Right. Well, to have been able to resist drugs like that and to still hold to your anti-interrogation training is extraordinary. That's quite a story.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the reasons why he was brought even deeper into programs, because he didn't break. Also, Fort Lewis, as an aside, Fort Lewis was the same facility that, remember Muhammad, I forget his first name, the DC sniper?
Oh, yeah, sure.
So, Malvo, Muhammad.
Well, I think John Malvo was the sniper's buddy, wasn't that it?
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
This guy served at Fort Lewis. Remember that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I do remember that. That's interesting.
Yeah, we always.
So there's your mind control. Right there. Very interesting.
It's interesting. So, to make a long story short, nothing came out of the interrogation. Eventually, I forget the exact span of time, but eventually he was released in the care of.
I think it was 3 or 4 days.
3 or 4 days. Who was the person that jogged my refresh my memory, Clay? Who was the person that
I think what happened was they contacted China Lake, and China Lake sent in a chopper.
Oh, they collected him
to Nellis. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah. They collected him, and the 2 Marines who actually, they didn't fare too well. They were an absolute psychological mess, from what I understand. They did not fare well at all during the interrogation process.
Well, in those days, that is so above top secret that, they must have been really worked over. Wow, that's sad. John Muhammad was the shooter,
right,
and his buddy was Lee Malvo. That's right, 17 years old. Okay.
Hey, Jeff, I'm going to throw an aside in here, just something I read recently, and it's kind of interesting. The prosecutor, if you say his name, I'll know it, but the prosecutor who had a lot of limelight in prosecuting the case of the 2 DC snipers, do you know, I read that he committed suicide. He jumped off the Grand Canyon somewhere and ended up killing himself. He evidently lost his wife, lost his house, very despondent, drove out to Arizona and ended up killing himself at the Grand Canyon. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
It's just an aside, pal, but I just wanted to share that with Edler.
You've got to feel sorry. Again, another victim of the machine, the Matrix. He did his best. And obviously, if what you're reporting is true, and I don't remember that at this point, but that's very sad.
Yeah, I actually looked it up. It's up there. You can find it, guys. It's definitely up there on the web. You can read about it. His name was
Ebert, E-B-E-R-T, I think, if I got this right here. Okay. Next, John Allen Muhammad, mastermind of the D.C. sniper attacks. This is important because of Fort Lewis, Washington, ladies and gentlemen. This is mind control up there. That's what they do. And we all talked about it then and suggested that this guy has to be controlled. That left 10 people dead.
Jeff, the trial, he screamed out, John Muhammad, didn't kill anybody.
Well, that's what many of them say. Or I don't remember a thing. And they don't.
Right.
They don't. All right, we have to pause for the top of the hour break. We will come right back. The prosecutor, Mr. Ebert, was 72 at the time, and he was a good one. All right, back with the Pickerings in just a few minutes. Okay, let's get right back to it. Special program tonight with Clay and Shawn Pickering as we are telling a story about a man named Richard and his alleged experiences, which are absolutely extraordinary. So hang on to your hats. Okay, who's up? Clay, Shawn?
Shawn.
All right, Shawn, go ahead.
Rich gets pulled out of that facility, and he's taken to China Lake, and he's brought in, I believe that it was a captain. Correct me if I'm wrong, Clay. Clay?
No, go ahead. I'm not. It's all right, but it was definitely an officer, so of a higher rank. Go ahead.
I think he was a captain anyway. So he sat down and words exchanged, and he said, I can't confirm or deny anything what happened. And he said, but I'm going to leave the room right now. And he poured Richard a drink and scotch, and just basically it was a whole tumbler full of scotch. He says, this is for you. And he says, I'm leaving the room now. Okay. So you can just spend some time with yourself there. So he left the room, and Rich looks over to the safe, and it's open. So he walked over the safe, and there was the SOM document. That's how we got it.
No kidding.
Well, keep in mind,
wow.
too, Shawn. Keep in mind, though, there was four SOM document manuals that have been updated. So he didn't grab the first two because they were in pristine condition. So he grabbed the one that was a little bit more dog-eared, because when when you open a manual, anything, it never goes back to its original position. So
very smart.
He went to the one. Yeah, he went to the one that was the third one. Said, "Hey, they're not going to notice if I open this up because there's probably enough finger oils on there, and it's dog-eared, and it's
not going
to go back to its pristine state." So that's what he
signed off on the people. It was also signed off on people that had taken it. Right.
Oh, so it's like it's a library book. You sign out for that. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, for our listeners, refresh them. SOM, Special Operations Manual pertaining to.
Sure. The retrieval. Right here, Jeff. It's pertaining to its extraterrestrial entities and technology recovery and disposal.
Very good.
And
all right.
It's the
which Bob has done a lot of great work on.
Yeah, we should say hello to Bob. I'm sure he's listening tonight. Commend him on all his wonderful work. And also, we want to say hi, wherever he is, up there, to William Tompkins. Bill made extraordinary contributions to this process of confirmation. Bill was given the go-ahead, and he, if you listen to the programs, said things that had never been said before. And he had so much more to say. And the good news is Bob is working on at least 2 more books. There was that much material that Bill Tompkins was working on when he had to leave. And they'll be coming out in time. So we're very grateful for that. And one of the things, I'll say it now so when it gets to you, you'll remember it. Bill used to talk about, he lived up 15 minutes from where I live. Same area, Southern Oregon, Medford, Oregon area. And he would always talk about, in the interviews, about the Navy League, which is, it sounds like a nice social organization for retired officers, okay? Oh no, much, capital M's, more than that. And Bill knew all about it. He built 2 homes while he was up here. He was here that long. And he would tell me things off air occasionally about that as well, because I live up here. And anyway, so just remember the Navy League. We're going to get there. All right? Go ahead, gentlemen.
So at that point, that's when Clay had met Richard and I had met him. That was the SOM, the SOM 1-01 document. We had it examined by Bob Wood, and if your eyes were not trained, you really think it was a copy of what it was already out there. But there were slight differences, and it offers up the wonderment. Like, why would if Richard had put forth that document, why would he do that with a document that was slightly different? Why would he type an entire document and use a different font? I think it was a raised letter that was not in the existing SOM document out there. So it was a different document.
It wasn't just a revision. It was not just a revision. We think it was tweaked.
They believe it was tweaked. There was also a couple of different words.
Okay.
in the documents. Bob.
So it was so close. Excuse me, but it was so close that it wouldn't be a revision. That it was
correct.
Tweaked somehow. Okay.
Correct.
All right.
Slightly.
Understood.
Correct. Slightly. And Bob Morningstar was wonderful. He was one that got us in contact with Bob Wood, and he was connected. When you ever get Robert Morningstar on your show again, you might want to ask him. He also met our source.
Very good. I will indeed.
Oh yeah. Hey, really quick, because I know there's so much information here, and it's what a timeline, Jeff. But
we're going to do this. We're going to continue on another night. We'll do another 3 hours. So don't rush. When we want to get this all out.
Got it, brother. That's good. Okay. All right. That's good. The two guys, I call them my two stalwarts. Okay. One doesn't want me to call him a pit bull. He said, "Hey, don't call me a pit bull. Call me a Siberian husky." That's
anything but a pit bull or a poodle. Okay, I got it.
No, but pits are great, man.
Robert's a remarkable man. Remarkable.
Oh, he's Bob lives up the street from us, and we don't see enough of him. We're doing other things, that's another story. But it's Bob Morningstar and Robert Vanderklark. Robert Vanderklark was in Army intelligence during Vietnam, and he was an interpreter within Westmoreland's office. And if you're listening right now, Bob, I cannot tell you how grateful Shawn and I that we had to sit on our thumbs for 8 years, okay, and not fight this and let this take its course, because that's what the program dictated, and we didn't want any more pain and misery coming to Rich and his family, and let things play out and give it a chance and say, hey, listen, let's for once not blow this up. Let's play this out and see where it goes. But those two guys, they know everything, pretty much everything. There's some things that they don't know that we learned a little bit more. We kept it just only for a confirmation process if someone else came up with it. But those two guys were stalwarts, and it was Bob Vanderklark who was with us the night that our source had to go into failsafe after he got outed at the Navy League. But I'm jumping ahead.
All right, we'll get there. Now, let me... While we're acknowledging people, there are two people that need to be acknowledged here on my behalf, and one of them is, of course, Major George Filer and Frank Chile. Frank set up the Bill Tompkins interviews. George participated. Dr. Bob Wood and my father were at Douglas Aircraft at the same time. My father was public relations director for 17 years at McDonnell Douglas Missiles and Space. Earlier it was McDouglas Aircraft, and they may not have known each other, but I think they probably had seen each other name-wise at that time. Bob worked at extraordinary levels there, and this whole story is huge, and it does tie in with William Tompkins. This whole thing is moving in a direction that is
William Tompkins,
unprecedented.
These guys are Navy, Jeff, okay? And it was drilled into us that Air Force was in charge of technology and contact when you're dealing with the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And we're going to put a slash there, phenomena, because that's another can of worms. That's probably a bigger can of worms than the extraterrestrial equation. The other was the Army, DHS, DOE's in charge of security and bases, and Navy's in charge of policy. And if anybody would know the overall writing picture, I believe, from what I have learned, it's the Navy end of things. And I strongly suspect the release of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program is Navy-inspired. Now, it's not a Department of Navy initiative. It's a Navy-inspired program.
That's important to people understand. It was not a Department of Navy initiative.
Got it.
That's very important to understand.
Got it.
It was Navy, but it wasn't Department of Navy.
Do we want to talk at this point a little bit about the... I don't want to jump too far ahead because it did make some noise, and it was an extraordinary step. The Pentagon announcement, the $22 million program, talking about things that they've known about for 80 years, like they were relatively new. I mean, it was kind of humorous when you think about it, but it was a step in the direction of as you like to say, confirmation. Anything you want to add to that at this point in the conversation?
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Sure.
Clay.
Let me just start with this, Shawn, and then you jump in after that. Well, what's interesting about it is that we learned about 2 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago, about the confirmation process through our intelligence source, who must go unnamed. We call them an intel source, and this intel source also was with us pretty much every step of the way when it came to Richard and learning about the program and trying to understand who, what, when, why, where, how. But what's interesting is that with the confirmation program is that we learned that this program we're rediscovering the wheel. I think that the guy who really nailed it is Colonel John Alexander, and he gave an excellent interview about what the exposure of this particular UFO UAP phenomenon is really about. Is that it's not so much that the government's withheld the secrets, because they've never withheld it. Is about getting the public to accept the reality that this particular phenomena exists.
Now, this is the same John Alexander that I know of, lives in Las Vegas and was head of the non-lethal weapons program and so forth.
Same one, remote viewing, OB, out-of-body experience.
Yeah.
I think he lives in Santa Fe, though, actually.
He used to. I think he used to live in Las Vegas. Anyway, he was on the program many times, and then go ahead.
Very good. Well, John understands the bureaucracy, and it was interesting when our Navy guy, I forget what year, Shawn, was that 2006? I think he went down to the X conference anonymously, and he sat in. And he said that
it was
one person he was most impressed was John Alexander, and he says, "Hey, he's got it right." And what our Navy guy was saying, what Rich was saying, is that, hey, the guy's explaining the bureaucracy, how the left hand doesn't know what the right hand isn't doing, that it's not a government-controlled program, and that it's a bottom-up, and it's only about those who have individual interests, and it's not institutional. And John Alexander is 100% right. And I was given a heads up 2 days ago. I had heard the interview a week ago, and my intel sources said, you need to listen to this. And yeah, I rediscovered the wheel because Shawn and I knew exactly what our intel source was saying and what John was saying, and that's how. If people understand that, they realize that no one has control over this. And actually, with Luis Elizondo and Tom DeLong and to the Academy of Swords, I applaud them in every sense of the word. But what they were able to do was get funding, whereby Alexander could get funding for his particular type of disclosure process. And here we are today, one step in 2017, which is interesting in itself. We'll get into that. 2017, where we have a little bit a better understanding, technologically speaking, that we're able to sense using our sensors this particular phenomenon, and that's very, very interesting. And it's very interesting that there is an admittance that 22 million from 2000. Pay attention to this one, Jeff. 2007 to 2012 was used in order to push forth the confirmation process. Now, here's the interesting thing, is that the DIA evidently, in certain circles, was part and parcel to pushing forth the release of the tapes and helping forth DeLong and Company, Luis Elizondo, and Hal Puthoff and the rest of them push forward this confirmation process. Now, in 2007, it was our guy, Rich, who met down in Washington, D.C., the DIA, about pushing forth this program. But we didn't know know what program. We didn't know what it was. We knew it was a disclosure program, but he had met with DIA at that time, and that was late fall. Shawn, correct me if I'm wrong. Late fall 2007. I remember him going down there, and what he was talking about.
It was November December timeframe of 07.
Well, what was very interesting about that is that what he was talking about was, at least the DIA and another alphabet agency, I suspect two more, was about USOs, unidentified submersible objects, and the Aegis radar system, which is instrumental in picking up these objects on the high seas, which the Navy is quite adept at. And this is what we're dealing with when we're dealing with.
Well, this is tied in with the Aegis anti-missile systems in terms of detection, instant lock-on, and tracking.
I
would
pick
assume
it up all the time. Now, just to follow this dollar bill a little bit further down the road as it gets blown. Well, what did our guy talk with Dr. McAbee about? They spent 3.5 hours talking about the Aegis missile system.
Wow.
And picking up objects over the horizon. That was in 2008. So I'm sitting here saying, hey, look at the timeline here. Look what Rich was involved in from at least 2007, when things really started to move, when he went down to DIA down in Washington, D.C., and all the way up until the time of 2012, when allegedly it was canceled, and it says the $22 million was canceled. But the interesting thing is that's another
07, Clay. 07 was when Richard got pulled into state.
Yes, that's like I said. Jeff, your head's going to spin, and some of the listeners are going to spin when they realize how these guys move in and out of agencies and how programs are funded or how they're
right. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, we just learned recently that two agencies, DOD and HUD, alone can't account for $21 trillion. Just those two. So how much money do deep black programs have? As much as they want. All right.
And Castronaut Austin Fitz is absolutely correct. She's done great work along with that professor. It's done great work. These unsupported accounting entries that get run by the DOD. Right. You get Congress to approve, say, a $30 billion satellite program. Okay, so they're going to spend $30 billion over 10 years. And Rich said, well, $30 billion, that's a lot for a satellite program. So they'll partially spend in fiscal year 1, partially spend in fiscal year 2. They may not spend anything in 3, and then they'll get another appropriation and another appropriation. So when Chuck Spinney, who was the guy that discovered the $800 hammer, he was the one that facilitated the legislation, which was the Financial Records Act of 1991, I think, which required every branch, every agency of the government, every department of government to pass an audit. Well, the DOD has never been able to pass an audit. They can't. When you start digging into the appropriations of money, where they go, they invoke national security.
Sure, of course. Yep. And
it's so you see the bureaucracies. Here's this is just a slight aside. Do you remember September 10th, 2001?
Yes, I do.
Rumsfeld gets up there and says $2.3 trillion of unsupported accounting entries we can't account for. Remember that?
Well, and that went right along with the comptroller, who made the similar announcement at almost the same time. Rabbi Dov, what the heck's his name? Anyway, you know who I mean. But yeah,
Shawn, before you go there, I'm going to bait Jeff here, okay? Just let's
okay.
in the audience, okay? Let's play this out. If I said, hey Jeff, listen, there's money missing in the radio program, and I think this is going on, and this is going on, and it was just announced, and I don't know where the books are, and I think we better, do something about it. Let me ask you something, Jeff. If that was announced the day before, let's say in the evening, let's just say, okay, towards the latter half of the day, and I tell you that what's your inclination for the next day?
Decide change the subject?
Yeah, just no. No, the inclination is that, hey, Jeff, let's see when I get in the office early the next day, because we better dot our I's and cross the T's.
Oh, we got to get our stories
straight. Make sure.
You bet.
Oh, no,
yeah.
Not only stories, but we got to make sure that paperwork, because, all hell's going to break loose, and make sure you get your people at that office early.
Now you know why.
Because, hey,
now you know why I don't keep any books. Anyway.
So the next day, so the next day, right? The SecDef gets up there, makes his announcement, right? September 10th. Next day, guess who's in the offices?
Funny.
All those people that were involved in the accounting of looking into the.
Well, the whole accounting team and basically most all the records were gathered in the Pentagon. For those of you who don't know it, which is exactly where that apparent cruise missile hit, and they were wiped out, all of them. Gone.
Okay, so
hey, let me give you this.
Interesting thing, this is how bureaucracies work. This is how bureaucracies work. When you have a huge problem, the next day it's CYA, cover your ass. So they got those guys in those offices the next day, and babing.
Yeah, Rabbi Zackheim was the comptroller at the time that the $2.3 trillion was acknowledged as missing. Rabbi Dov Zackheim, and then you got Rumsfeld. So yeah, and then they all get together and they're wiped out.
Well,
go ahead.
It's one thing to get. It's one thing to get the. Sorry, Jeff, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it's one thing to get the. It's another thing to get the paper trail out of the way. But you still have human intelligence. You got the brain trust. You got people that know, that can reconstitute the investigation based on their knowledge.
That's called humint.
You got it, baby. So there's too much knowledge walking organically around that area of the investigation.
Right.
Now, keep this in mind. How many of you guys all saw Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan, the remake? Remember this?
I didn't
this is
see it.
Kind of how. Oh, you should see it. The reality imitates. Fiction imitates reality. Well, there was an explosion at, I believe it was Star Trek, at the Star Trek library, right? And it didn't really make sense why the Star Trek library wasn't tactically or strategically a really auspicious target. And so Kirk is in there with the brass at that particular point, all the brass of Star Trek, and he asked a question out loud. He says, this is not making sense. He says, we get the brass together and something to look at this particular terrorist act, and I don't understand why everybody, and then they get attacked and hit.
Well, the Polish government learned that same thing when they all got on that same jet, didn't they?
Yeah, well,
it's
that's
along
interesting.
those lines, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
So, just to dovetail back to our source, is that Richard always drove our heads. You've got to understand how bureaucracies work, how the second and tertiary levels of bureaucracy work. If you understand, then everything starts making sense.
Right.
So when he got involved in this program, part of it was if you're going to have confirmation or contact, you have to get the secondary and tertiary levels of bureaucracy ready so they can respond, so there's continuity of services in government. But it's not at the high level. It's at the secondary and tertiary levels. That's where he worked.
Okay. All right. Let's move on with the story here. We got Rich has the Psalm manual that was obviously given to him because he was an extraordinary case, and he was brought in at that point at some level. So he's got the manual. What happens next?
I'll say this, is that what happened next is that I guess he was at China Lake, and I forget exactly I think he went back to D.C., but what was interesting is that during that time that he saw what he saw and his interrogation process, well, your security clearances just got upped.
Yeah.
And that means he was brought really far into the black program at that time. At that point, Shawn, I'm not sure about the JAG. I think it was the JAG interlude in, I think, D.C. Remember that with the stenographer?
Oh yeah, that's correct. Yeah. he was brought into D.C. and he had it's a long since I've thought about it. Yeah, he had the JAG officer there, and they basically took a statement. And it was put in a safety deposit box. Is that correct, Clay?
Yeah, I think so. In a safe, yeah. And they had to bring in a stenographer. And no, he actually was worried about his safety at that issue. So because he had seen some certain things, and he had requested that make sure he had a stenographer that was clear to be able to take down his testimony about what he experienced, and that was to guarantee his safety in terms of what he knew about the program.
Was the JAG officer there in a positive, constructive sense, or an adversarial, watchdog kind of a sense? JAG, for those of you out there, it means Judge Advocate General Corps. It's the legal branch of the U.S. military, Army, Air Force, whatever, Navy. Okay. So you got a military lawyer there, is what it amounts to.
Yeah. Go ahead, Shawn.
It was for his protection.
Okay.
Protection. JAG has always been. Yeah, JAG has been, even throughout this whole affair, an insulator and a protector of our source. I never got anything negative out of JAG. Talk about guys that probably knows a lot of secrets is JAG. These guys, man, they
Well, of course, they're the guys that have to, I don't want to say threaten, but they have to threaten people, and they keep people quiet, and they tell people very kindly and gently, it's in your best interest not that this never happened. So it has to come from somewhere, and that's certainly one of the potential arms. Now, let me go back to your relationship with Rich. All this is being related to you both over, I guess, a period of time as you're gaining his confidence and vice versa. And I guess you'd have to ask yourself at some point, Clay and Shawn,
yes,
why is he telling us this? Why
Great
us?
question. Great question. I think one of the things this is one of the things that I think that happened is that, first of all, we were vetted. In other words, we were checked out. Okay.
Right.
We were checked out by the NSA, and they see that we didn't have a criminal record. We didn't work for any foreign intelligence agencies. We didn't belong to any groups. We were essentially kind of clean in that aspect of it.
Well, yeah, we're back to our golden rule, though. You're not compromisable, or are you?
Well, no.
Not that I'm aware of.
Let's put it this way. Well, not that I'm aware of. We're green.
Yeah.
We're not unstable.
That's what I said. You're not compromisable. Okay. All right. We're
also,
clean.
there's a little bit of a history with us too. One, and I'm not one to toot my horn. I don't like to bring it up, but they knew my name. They had to, because I played professional football for about 4 years, and they knew Shawn's background, definitely through academics and what he was involved in, and in the arts here in New York. So, I mean, we're pretty straightforward. We're really pretty straightforward.
All right.
So that's one. Now,
but there had to be, there had to be a decision made, Clay, at some point to bring you both along with potentially the vision that you're going to play the role you're playing right now tonight as an intermediary in the process. Somehow.
Jeff, it's almost impossible to determine exactly what happened because it wasn't conveyed to us, but we can only guess the fact that they used Richard as a sounding board. I said, what do you think of these guys? And they gave him incredible leeway. He goes, I think they're worth investigating.
Got it. All right.
Okay. But here's the other thing.
At the end of the day.
Yeah, go ahead, Shawn.
Nope.
Here's the other thing that vetted us is that at that time, we were, and this is, oh God, Jeff, this is another story, because we had our fingers in other pies, but this is the pie that we were involved in that we wanted to keep our interest. But we also knew quite a bit about the pedophilia issue.
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah. So not only did we know, but we knew people involved in the investigation, and especially on the NYPD end. That's another story. And so we kind of knew about that. We knew, obviously, Ted, and we knew about John DeCamp, and we knew at that point, I think we knew Nick. Yeah, we knew Nick Bryan at the time, who wrote the Franklin Scandal, which is the second book, and a much more detailed book than John DeCamp's The Franklin Cover-Up. So we kind of introduced that to our source, and he, a Navy source, and he took that back to his people, and he discussed that at least a little bit from what we knew, and they said, "How do you know this?" And he goes, "Well, I know a couple of guys in the private sector who are aware of some of this information," and I think that was another aspect of what we
that's interesting.
Why we got
that's such an ugly, sticky mess. I had DeCamp and Bryant both on the program about this issue, and back then it was so dark and ugly. I'm surprised it ever got to be as well known as it has. Go ahead.
Well, I'll tell you this. I'm the one that provided the NYPD source to Nick Bryant, my brother and I.
Wow.
I'm very, very, very close. And like I said, we can go off on digressions, and I don't want to, but I got a call from my source who goes all the way back in terms of knowing what happened with Craig Spence in Washington, D.C., without getting too deep in this. And he came back to me after the Aberdeen, the Clinton Aberdeen Podesta laptop one. He came back. He said, "By the way, Clay, you were right." And he meant Shawn and myself were right, because we knew what was going on with Ted. We introduced that to him about some of that information. But that was part of the vetting process, I think, that happened with Rich and his people. Guidance. Okay, so we've never really got into that or told people about that.
Well, we'll do that another time. No, it's as ugly as it gets. Doesn't get any worse. Here's John David Podesta. People don't even remember this. He was President Clinton's chief of staff. Okay? Now, you can go and remember Hillary Clinton and his relationship, but this goes back to when Slick was president. Chief of staff. All right. Okay. All right, let's go back to the main narrative here. Back to Rich. Back to you guys. You're vetted. All right, you're checked. All right.
We're about 1983, when the incident happened with our source. And then he actually exits the military, and he goes in the private sector in IT. So he's there for about, I would say, 5 years. And he gets called back.
Time out. Remember? And I was at 82, 83. He also, our source, got hurt. Okay?
That's correct.
He got hurt flying as an electronics officer near the Kamchatka Peninsula.
In the Pacific, Northwest Pacific.
You remember what happened September 1st, 1983, I think it was?
Flight 8, whatever the heck it was.
Brother.
Yeah.
007.
And Clay, that's enough said on that, right?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, we won't get into that. All right.
Okay, so he's hurt, and he goes in the private sector. Then he's there for about probably 4 or 5 years, and then Gulf War I comes out, right? So he gets brought in. He was part of the advance team in that assault. So he flew in before he was in there about, I would say, probably about 4 or 5 months before the invasion.
This had to be of a high-tech nature. He didn't go in as a combat Green Beret.
No.
He went in as something else, obviously. You go back to the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and he's putting DIA devices along the trail. And
keeping this in mind, too, is that he was lack of better words, an EW officer, electronic warfare officer.
Right. So, people just don't know, and all of you, I'm not putting anybody down. You don't have a chance to know the technology that is available to this government and military is in some venues decades ahead of where you are told and where you'd guess.
I'll give you something specific. An intel friend of mine said, "I'm just seeing things now that I saw 30 years ago."
30.
Yep, that was the time frame that.
Well, that's trickled down to the public. There you go. Okay, good. All right, so we're 1983. Then we're Gulf War, advance work there. He was injured when we lost McDonald and the other people in 007. Tell us more.
So he's engaged in operations in Gulf War One. Didn't get into
hold on.
Too much.
Stop right there, Shawn. Stop right there. In '85, Rich tried to resign his commission. They wouldn't let him.
They wouldn't let him.
Right? And they wouldn't let him do it because he was black. He was, and I mean black operations. Go ahead, Shawn. It's important that you follow a timeline here.
There's not too much we can say on his Gulf War operations because he didn't get into it. He wouldn't get into it. There was, I think, maybe a couple anecdotes.
That's not important to the main narrative. That's fine.
Right. So he does his operations, and the Gulf War one ends as quickly as it begins, as we all know. He ends up in Washington D.C. and he's hung out to dry. He doesn't have a job. He shows up to the office where he was working in Washington D.C. and the office is completely cleaned out. Everything's gone.
It's sanitized, completely gone. Nothing there.
So he's sitting in the mall.
It was a brass plate.
He's sitting in the mall, not knowing what to do.
That's pretty funny.
And he didn't tell him what to do. Mm-hmm. So he's. I remember Rich telling me, he was like, I just sat there. I'm like, I don't know what to do. So he ended up going back home and starting his life again. And that's how it works. I mean,
well, actually,
they didn't.
He had a friend that says, "Hey, Lee." Well, he had a friend that kind of knew the black world, and he said he called him and got a hold of him somehow, and he said, "Hey, listen, this happened. What do I do?" And he said, "Well, just go home and go to work. They'll find you." That's essentially what he said.
How it works.
Don't call us, we'll call you. All right.
Basically. So then he goes back into the IT business. I don't remember much in the 90s. That is there any recollections, Clay, in the 90s?
I do, but I tell you, I do. Yeah, I know he was in the IT business, but I'm not going to say because I don't want the trolls calling up and harassing them exactly what he was doing and where. So yeah, he was in the IT business in the public sector because of his electronics background. He knew what was going on. So, but without getting into it, was not that important. But that was a particular period in his life where he was. Okay.
So we're moving through the 90s now.
Gotcha.
So basically, in the 90s, he's civilian.
Okay.
There's not much. Nothing stands out that it's really germane to this. It's not until 9/11 happens and the Gulf War. The second Gulf War happens, Gulf War II, in 2003. 2003. 2003, yeah. That he gets pulled in. But the significant thing that happened in his life is his brother was killed. Clay, you want to get into that?
Yeah, I'll mention this. It's public record. Robert Thielman, Lieutenant Colonel, United States Army, was killed on the border of, I think it was El Paso, Juarez, running drug interdiction. He was killed in a Huey. His chopper went down. But I'll tell you this, Jeff, it wasn't about drugs. Okay? It was about a weapon system. And I won't say what it is.
All right.
And they were running interdiction and surveillance, and I think they caught one of those. Let's put it that way. And one of the things that was said to him before he went up there, he said, or I think by his brother, he said, listen, if any trouble gets down, make sure you come down on the right side of the border. And they did, but it cost him his life. And people can find that gravestone on Robert Thielman. And that was Rich's the younger brother, older brother, younger brother, right?
Younger brother.
Yeah, I think younger. Yeah, just a second. Is the next youngest. So it was very, very. I think it was the most painful loss to Richard, and really tough. Go ahead, guys.
So he gets called in 2003.
Called in where, Shawn?
Back
what?
right back into the black program.
Okay.
So he was tasked. They brought him in. I think the area he worked in was Korea, right, Clay?
Yeah. Well, I think he did something. That's where it's a little sketchy. I don't know. I think he was out of Korea on 2 different occasions, because you got to remember is at that time there was a huge deficiency with providing military personnel, because you had the Afghanistan war and you had the Iraq war, and then you had other military interdictions and duties around the world. So there was a huge cry, hence why he was in the reserves, and he was brought back in. So I don't know exactly when he was out in Korea, but I do know he was there. I know he was there later.
He worked in the Korean section in intelligence, right?
Yeah, no, I did. Right, that's true. Okay, yes, but he was actually at times brought there. Go ahead.
Basically, he was brought in because he was of the analog era, and that he knew analog systems really well, and they brought him in for his expertise. Is that correct, Clay?
Yep, exactly.
Okay. All right.
So at this point, he's no longer he's active. He's out of the reserves. He's actually active. And at that point, that's where we meet him, 2006.
Right.
Okay.
Correct.
You saw, the man in the whites, Navy whites, outside the establishment in New York.
Summer whites, pal. And that's when he was going back. He was driving forth. He'd work out there for 2 weeks, come back. He had a private business doing something IT work, computer work, and then he would go back 2 weeks and then come back. And so, that's what he was doing during that time when I had met him.
All right, very good.
Okay. Constantly going to Washington, coming back. So that's when we meet him. And then, as we say, Clay, we end up meeting him. And so we start moving through. He actually gets called in to go to Afghanistan. He was, I believe that was in 2006-07 time frame, Clay?
Right. 2000, I think it was 2000, I got to remember, 2006, Shawn, I'm fairly certain, or early, or spring of 2007.
It's spring summer 2007, because he's brought into state in the December timeline of 07, so it would have to be state. So it's got to be, it's before he's brought into state, right?
Right. Yeah, that's right. Just before that, and that's when he was sent to Afghanistan. And yes, I have pics. We have those pictures of certain.
So here's a man that never served. His detractors say that he never served in the military. Yet we have pictures of him in Afghanistan. Well,
actually, there's one picture. He was careful not to be in the pictures, but there's one I suspect is him. But he was out there part of an intelligence gathering team for a very, very high-ranking admiral. And he was out there for a period of time. And we even got a call from him from Afghanistan.
Yeah, we were at the cultural contact meeting.
And I got we're doing a lecture, and we got a call from him, and I said, "Holy cow!" So, he was out there for a period of time. I say, 3 months, Shawn? Was about that right?
Yeah.
So he did an assessment for this briefing team, and he came back, and I remember I said, "Hey, he couldn't talk too much because it's classified information." I said, "Hey, how'd it go?" And he goes, he felt terrible because he ended up shooting a young boy who was strapped full of explosives. He felt absolutely terrible. I've never shared that. So, but I don't think, in terms of war, those guys are dealing with it. It's no shame in saying,
here's a man who went through Vietnam, and that doesn't make it easy to do. But he had to come back with some questions, although he knew the answers. And the answers to the question, why are we in Vietnam? And then it extends, why are we in Afghanistan? He knew the answers.
One better, Jeff.
He knew.
I got his. I have his Medal of Freedom. His Medal of Freedom citation, and he refused. He said it was an embarrassment. He wouldn't. Yeah. I said, "Hey,
well, not surprised."
So well, he gave it to me, and he said, "Oh, listen, I'll hold it for you. Don't throw it away." He just wanted nothing to do with it, but he gave some very interesting accounts about his time in Afghanistan, and I think I know I wrote this a little bit out. Is that he had administered aid to some of the Afghanistan women who were absolutely filthy, lice-ridden, a lot of things, and they had lined these women up and given them shampoos, and these women were crying. They were literally crying, and they couldn't understand why the women were crying, because they'd never had a man touch them so gently, and they were so uncomfortable they didn't know how to react. And I got to tell you, that was so impactful to Rich and me. When I heard that, I said, "Oh my God!" I couldn't.
Never had a man of their own religion touch them so gently and with kindness. Now that brings another tangential issue up here. What the hell are we bringing these people over here for? They don't fit. They never will fit. Their culture is entirely different. If we're going to help them, we need to help them in their own countries. Anyway, that's another story.
It is another story, and I think if Jim Mars was alive today, he could elaborate that ad infinitum on the issue. But I mean, and these are, it's like there's a segment of the majority of the population, Muslim people, that are very, very good people. They're under terrible, terrible oppressive measures when it deals with their religious, the madrasas and the Wahhabism and some of these schools that are that are indoctrinating and dividing.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you things. Jim was beyond repulsed by all of this stuff, this war crap. He just, what are we doing? It doesn't make any sense. All right.
I did run over one incident in 2005 before Rich went off to Afghanistan. Before he actually met him, he was tasked to go down to Katrina. Can I get into that, Clay?
Talking about Hurricane Katrina?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we got a break. We have a break. Hold on. We have a break in about a minute. So mull it over during the break and whatever you want. If you want to go into there, fine. There were things that obviously went on at Katrina that most people will never know. Very strange things. And to this day. And now I've been able to get a copy, thanks to Danny, who sent it in, of Psalm 1-01, and I'll put that up under the Pickerings for all of you. It's a PDF. You can actually look at the manual and see what we're talking about. And that's the manual dealing with extraterrestrials and captured craft and disposal thereof. Disposal not into the junk, but disposal into various aspects and assets of the Deep Black program. So it'll be an interesting read. So Psalm 101 is there. It'll be there.
That's great work by Robert Wood on that. He's spent a good portion of his time on that, verifying and examining that.
By the way, I get word from Frank Chile that Bob says there are probably 3 more books that William Tompkins will be publishing posthumously, so that Bob will be editing. So that's terrific. All right, next hour we're going to move into the Twilight Zone-ish aspect of this a little bit. And then next week, maybe this very night next week, we'll have the Pickerings back for another 3 hours. We're going to tell this whole story here so it doesn't come out piecemeal here and there. We're going to get it down and make sure it's completely covered, and then we'll see about what else we want to talk about. So coming up next, Hour 3, with Shawn and Clay and all of you, and we will be right back. Don't go away. And welcome back. Hour number 3 with the Pickerings tonight, and I'm holding this night next week open so we can move into part 2. All right, let us move. We've been through the Gulf War. We are now... go ahead. We're 2004, something like that. Yeah, 2005.
A quick aside about Katrina.
Uh-huh. You want to do something on that?
Shawn.
Well...
No, hold on, Shawn. Hold on, Shawn. Hold on. All right, one aside I wanted to make sure I get out before we leave Afghanistan. When our guy did his intelligence, when he gave his intelligence briefing to this high-ranking admiral, the admiral says, "Do I want to really know about this?" And he said, "Well, it's not good." And he goes, "Do you want me to pass it up to?" Rich said, "Do you want me to pass up the chain of command?" He goes, "Pass it up the chain of command." That's what. So I wanted to share that with you.
Interesting.
So, in other words, it's called, hey, if I don't know about it, then I can't be held.
That's right. It's not in my lap. Yeah.
Yep, you got it, right? Hey, that's interesting. Not on my watch?
Not in my lap.
I wonder who said that.
Not in my watch either.
No. Okay.
All right.
Go ahead, Shawn.
Just a quick aside on Katrina. Rich had written a letter, an op-ed letter to a newspaper dealing with the whole Katrina incident. He was tasked to go down to areas just outside of New Orleans to retrieve errant vials of very infectious diseases that were everyone fled so quickly that a lot of the refrigerators were left open and the floodwaters came in and you had vials of...
Wait a minute. I remember this. There was a BSL 3 or 4 facility down there, and they were trying to say how it was safe, and I didn't believe it for a second. Am I right? Nope. Am I thinking right?
Well, wait. Let me just say this. Jeff, which is interesting. Let's go back in history. Who's over there? Who had the huge bioweapons research facility dealing with virus and infectious diseases? Tulane University, right?
There you go.
All right, So let's just keep that in mind, especially when we talk to Judith Berry Baker in that area of weapons research or infectious diseases or...
no, you had it right. Weapons, that's what they are.
Biocontagions.
Right.
Go ahead, Shawn.
I believe they even had vials of Ebola bopping up and down in the waters.
Good
so
Lord.
They had to go in there in their white biosuits. It's 95 degrees. There's no light. And they're going through these facilities with snakes kind of swimming around them. And it was just absolute hell. So he was tasked to retrieve those items along with his team.
With about 24 Marines. Is that correct? Shawn?
I don't remember the exact number.
Around 24 Marines,
but it was we're like that. But
okay.
He brought in one evening. We're at Clay's bar, and he brought in these very gigantic pictures. And he pulls them out. They're boards, picture boards that are very large, and they show women, primarily black women. And he said these are the rape victims in the Superdome.
Yeah.
So anyone that thinks that didn't happen, wrong. What's more instructive, I go, Rich, these are boards. You did a presentation. You did a presentation for some subcommittee about what actually
military. Not only did they. Go ahead.
I can't get into specifics, but the rapists, I will say this, the rapists were not black. They were white.
Most of them. 3/4 of them.
Most of them.
Those who were in the Superdome.
Correct.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And keep this in mind, Jeff. We saw those pictures.
Uh-huh.
It's inside the Superdome,
Uh-huh.
and you see the women. And actually, there was one picture of the rapist. It was the white rapist, and he was dressed in drag, trying to hide from the Marine contingent that was looking for them, because people had pointed them out and said, that's them. They got corroboration, and they knew exactly who the rapists were. I think there was around 23 or 24 of those guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
go ahead, Shawn.
This is interesting. So, hold on. This is interesting. A little footnote. So, the government was eminently aware of what was going on in there, and they sent a special ops team in there to deal with it.
No, be careful, Jeff. Be careful. No.
All right.
This is an interesting thing, is that when they were picking up the vials and also retrieved monkeys, okay?
Yeah.
From some of the laboratories, because the monkeys, some of them were infectious. Keep that in mind, okay?
Yes.
Okay, keep that in mind. And they were thirsty and hungry, and they were using, what do they call it, the blow darts? They get them out of the trees.
Trank darts, yeah.
Just to open it. Yes, they found it was much easier just to open a bag and put a banana or water, and the monkeys would run right out of the tree, right into the bag, and they'd take them. So, and then a Huey would come in. I'm going to be more detailed here, Shawn. Huey would come in and then take the monkeys and the vials or whatever else they found. Now, they didn't spend too much time in the lab because, you're up to your chest in water, and there's alligators, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And those they didn't want to be there. And the syringes, and it's just no way.
I understand.
So they did the best. You got it. So the best they could do was to clean it up and put the monkeys. The Hueys would come in, and they had pontoon boats. So what they did was, instead of going back to their base, they took the initiative because they had some water. Says, hey, these people need help. So that was an on-the-spot decision.
Oh, it was a collateral move while they were there. How interesting.
You got it.
Right.
That's how that works. That's how this works. And so they decided, let's go to the Superdome. I'm sure they had heard the reports that it wasn't copacetic.
Yeah.
And so they said, let's go down there and let's see what happened. Well, they got in there all right. And I often remember it was one of the major news, one of the mainstream media sites, maybe NBC, CBS, and there was a black gentleman outside sitting in the lawn. He said, you have no idea what's going on there. I won't go in there. I'm going to stay out here. Remember that? I don't know if you remember that. So those guys got inside there, and they found out what was going on. And they found out there was these gangs, 3 or 4 gangs going around raping women. And those boards Shawn talked about, we've seen big boards. One of the girls was raped. She was raped repeatedly, that she was bleeding. And I believe it was our guy who administered first aid, gave her nylons because nylon doesn't stick the blood. Mm-hmm. And evidently she clocked one of the rapists and knocked out a tooth, so they were able to find out exactly which guy it was that tried. And I think there was about 23. So anyhow, they gathered these guys up. They got them all. Okay, one was hiding in a closed hamper. One was hiding actually in a big vat of feces, trying to hide from the Marines. One charged the Marine. He put his helmet down and knocked him down. So they tie-wrapped these guys, threw them in the back of the Humvees, and then took them away at some point, or took them to a place where they could hold them. So at some point, the JAG officer came in, and he said, listen, I understand that we have these perpetrators, and that they've been positively identified. He said, but as you know, we have to follow civilian law, and they have to follow the constitutional rights. And so let's make sure we adhere to it. It was a gunny. I think it was Gunny Marine or Gunny Marine said, how about if we just tie wrap them and throw them in the swamp? And the JAG officer looked at him and said, no, and walked out the door.
I got it. Enough said.
So,
and that's it.
Got it. All right.
Okay. Let us move into areas that are going to begin to believe to be unbelievable to some people. We're going to move toward this now, if we're ready.
So, Rich gets pulled into state. Okay? And the admiral says and Richard was reticent. He wasn't quite sure he wanted to go to state because he felt if he went into state, no one would have his back. Didn't trust it.
Uh-huh.
But the admiral, who was his, I'm not going to get that because I don't want to get located in on it. But he said, look, I'm glad that you're part of state. We're going to need as many of us in state when we make contact in 2017.
When we have contact.
Right. So Rich didn't say anything. And so he ended up meeting. I wasn't there. Clay, you pick it up because I wasn't there when
it was 2000. This is about 2000. This is 2007. After he had been down in D.C., he was with State, I believe, and at that point, Shawn, and he was with he had met with DIA and probably a couple alphabet agencies, I'm sure of it. And they were talking about USOs and the Aegis radar system. Okay, so I'd seen him. He'd come up and he had a really inquisitive look, puzzled look, and he said, "Hey, I got to ask you something." And he said, "What does contact mean to you?" I go, "Wow." I said, "That's pretty specific." I said, "Contact." And I said, "Wow. I mean, are you talking?" He says, "Extraterrestrial contact?" And he looked at me. He goes, "Exactly. That's exactly what I mean." Any more to that, Shawn? And I think we need as many in the state. I think he made that comment in front of both of us.
Correct.
At that time. So
he gets pulled in the state, and so Rich gets pulled in the state. So he's there from November, December, January time frame. So we're one night we're hanging out, we're talking, and it was after the Stevensville sighting, right, Clay?
Okay, hold on.
In January.
Now, keep this in mind. In 2006, you had the O'Hare incident. Okay, November. Okay, you with me on this, Jeff?
Oh, I broke the story right here with Peter Davenport.
Okay, fantastic, bro. No, I didn't hear you on there. I just want to make sure that you're there on there.
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay, 2006, November, the O'Hare incident. Interestingly, January 8th of 2008, you had the Stevensville incident. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so go ahead and pick it up there, Shawn. I know you were. I don't want to interrupt your stream of thought.
So we bring it up. He said, interesting enough, I'm going to a meeting tomorrow at the UN on these two specific incidents and other issues. And he said,
this is February 11th.
Correct. February 11th.
Now, Stevensville, again, just to mark this, was January 8th, so we're now up to February 11th, all right?
Correct. So he said, I want you to get this information out to the Internet, but not until after I speak to you after the meeting, when I brief you roughly about what I can talk about roughly. And he had gotten permission.
Right.
He said, hold on, and he actually had gotten permission. He actually went outside, made a phone call, and he said, okay, but you have to wait till I see you. I don't want it out there before it happens, or it ain't going to happen. So we said, okay. So they had the UN UFO meeting, quote unquote, at the UN. Now, it wasn't about UFOs that initiated the meeting at the UN. It was another topic. This is how they do it. So you got
There's a cover. All right, there's a cover. There's a diversion. I understand.
You got it.
Correct.
Exactly.
So they came in. He said the security was incredibly high. Cell phones, everyone was strip searched. You could bring nothing with you into the meeting.
This is 08?
This is
or 09?
08.
All right.
This is February 12th.
This is a month after Stevensville.
Correct.
Stevensville.
Yep, and it's in the morning.
Okay.
It's in the morning. So the essence of the meeting was, it was I can't remember the cover. I can't remember. Can you remember the cover issue?
Well, I've been trying to find that out. Rich never told us what the cover is, but I think it had to deal with the shoot down of the Hawaiian. Remember the missile that happened? If I have my time frame right, remember the missile that the United States Navy shot down? I think it was a Chinese satellite that was flying too low, and they shot it near just a few hundred miles east of Hawaii.
Vaguely.
Yeah,
Vaguely.
I think it was a satellite.
I can't be sure. It was a shoot down of a satellite.
It was a satellite.
Yeah, I think it had. Yeah,
and
I think. But we have to be fair. We have to be fair. I don't know for certain because I really dug on that. Rich has often said one of the great covers is to be able to talk about the piracy that was happening in the Gulf of Aden and be able to say, hey, foreign domestic counterparts, hey, listen, we got to protect commerce and shipping. That's a perfect cover to be able to talk about things you want to talk about.
Okay.
Outside of that, that's how these guys work.
Right.
So, I remember Rich telling me that, especially, hey, that piracy issue is pretty good cover. Do you take advantage of it? So I suspect strongly during that time, I think it was the shoot down of the satellite that they were using as a cover.
Okay.
And so that's where you can open and broach subjects normally not broached. You can't advertise, hey, we're going to talk about UFOs, as you well know, Jeff. Can't talk about UFOs, UAPs. God knows, you won't be able to do it. But once you get in there, when you're dealing with people sophisticated, at least many of them were military. Russians were there, Chinese were there, Indians were there. So you can start to broach the subject of what you want to talk about.
Okay. So Rich was there.
Yes.
All right. What capacity?
Everybody was in cities except for 2 Russians who were in uniform.
What was Rich's capacity? State sent him there?
Yes. Well,
all right.
He was actually working for the intelligence agencies, sheep-dipped in state.
All right. And what was he doing? Was he leading? Was he watching, observing? What was he doing there?
No, he was starting trouble. And I mean that. Well, I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that a lot of things got broached about the phenomena. What happened within that meeting was, in how it came up, the UFO topic was about O'Hare and Stephenville and God knows where else in the world about we, the U.S., saying that's not our technology. It's not our technology.
Well, O'Hare, anybody who saw O'Hare, who was there or studied the story from all the accurate write-ups about it, knows damn well it wasn't our technology. It was obvious. 5 minutes that disc hovered right over that terminal. Was it C-17? I can't remember. And pilots loading and unloading. I had a pilot who was taxiing. It was a Boeing airliner. I forget which air. It might have been UAL. Across the runway, looking over at C-17 and looking at this craft hanging right in the air, broad daylight, right over it, I guess several hundred feet, 500 feet. And then there's a cloud deck. And after 5 minutes, the thing went straight up through the clouds and actually like a cookie cutter punched a hole through the clouds. It went that fast.
Now, I'm going to digress here just a little bit, just to offer just a little insight, okay? And I'm inclined to believe, Jeff, I'm inclined to believe you, okay? Because first of all, you're going to run an op over an airport. All right, wait a minute. Who benefits from those seeing the op? Okay,
right?
Why over an airport? Okay, so you have to ask yourself that question: what advantage, tactical advantage, or strategic advantage?
Exactly. Right.
For running an operation of a UAP over an airport.
Yeah, the control tower saw it. It was on radar. It was all there. And I had one of the pilots on the program here for an hour. He described the whole thing.
Well, I'm only going to offer this digression. We're going to continue on with this, okay?
Yeah.
But what's happened with the Advanced Aerospace Threat Interpretation Identification Program, is that there is a huge split within the military intelligence, more intelligence academia, intelligence academia, military, maybe aspect about what happened with the Nimitz tape and the release of the what Luis Elizondo put out. So there's a huge split whether they're saying that's ours or theirs. Okay. Now, interestingly,
well, you saw what the squadron leader. Excuse me, Clay. You saw what the squadron leader said when he was asked point blank, "What do you think it was?" And he said on Fox and probably other outlets, he said, "I don't know, but it wasn't from this planet." And that's a quote.
Eric Davis said it's not human. Okay, let me be fair to physicist Eric Davis, who works as the chief physicist for Robert Bigelow. A very credible man.
Right.
Was with NIDS and one of the lead researchers on the Skinwalker Ranch, which is a whole other story.
A fascinating story, yeah.
Oh, absolutely, and we know something of that too, off the radar. But what's interesting about that is that Eric is of the firm opinion that it is not ours. It's not human. He won't say extraterrestrial because we're dealing with a phenomena. Okay, and what I mean by phenomena is that we can't relegate what we see or what the nuts and bolts strictly to UFO, extraterrestrial, UAP. In other words, are we dealing with interdimensional, multidimensional? Are we dealing with...
well, how about let's just keep it simple. We're keeping with normal terrestriality, cohabiting a huge planet in which 2/3 of it is water, and they can go underwater and have all the facilities they want there. They could have been here forever.
I actually not. That's for another story. But I have a theory for that. I call them terrestrials. In other words, they've been here so long. They're extraterrestrial in nature, in origin. Okay, let's just make that presupposition as far as a hypothesis. They've been here so long on terra firma, these extraterrestrials, they are terrestrial. So you're dealing with that segment here.
There you go. Yeah, okay. That was my point. All right, very good. All right, go ahead.
I got you. But to make the point here is that there's the O'Hare incident and the Stephenville incident coming from the Navy. This is important. The Navy who released, it was Navy tapes, the Fravor, the pilot Fravor, its tape. Those are Navy tapes, okay? Which was confirmed by Eric Davis in terms of the chain of custody that I listened to the other day about where the tapes come from.
Do we know, briefly, Clay, do we know exactly where those tapes came from? Have we got it nailed down yet?
Yes, from what I understand, it came right from the Hornets. But it was released in 2000, actually I think it was 2007. The German company UV, Ultravision or Vision Unlimited, VU, German company named VU, released it, had the tapes, and that's where they originally got it from, either an intermediary or directly from the U.S., someone from the USS Hornet. That's where it came from. This is according to what Eric Davis is saying. Eric Davis is a chief physicist. Okay, so that's what I understand the chain of custody is. One of the things that was troubling me, okay? Two, according to Eric Davis, John Lear, and again, we're digressing, but I think this is important in the program to understand about the provenance of the tape, is that according to Eric Davis, the sound that John Lear, which is interesting, John says there's a sound, you're hearing background noise, which is not consistent with communications aboard a fighter. But what happened, according to Eric Davis, is that the pilot left open his mic. In other words, he had a hot mic. That's why we could hear that background noise. That's why some people are claiming that this is a hoax. Okay? So if you have an open mic, that means you're going to have a conversation that's not going to be consistent with proper protocol in terms of pilot to pilot or pilot to ground or pilot to carrier. So that's why there was winds coming out of the west maybe and this and that. So it wasn't exactly the type of terminology that pilots. So what Eric is saying is that background noise that we hear within the the pilots talking during the time they're chasing the Tic Tac. He had a hot open mic. We'll have to wait on that and see how that turns out. But here's the important thing. Going back, it's the Navy who's pushing this forward. And it was the Navy that, in terms of our guy being a part of the State Department, sheep-dipped in the State Department, moving at that time the disclosure process, which is in reality we've had disclosure, but it's a confirmation process. Go ahead, Shawn. I don't want to.
So at this point, they have the meeting but they have the meeting. So you have China, Russia, France, Great Britain are there. The Russians are in uniform. What's interesting is that the Stevensville case allows a wedge opportunity to step in and present an opportunity to move forward information, relating of information to these principals, these countries. Stevensville was an opportunity. So off of the UN meeting, further meetings happened. Now, if you dovetail this into potential contact in 2017, what this means is that these principals will be notified and allowed. Their secondary and tertiary bureaucratic organizations will start moving on the planning of such an event. But they have to be aware of our position. They have to be aware that it's not ours, and that further dialogue can happen, but it won't happen at the UN, which did in fact happen after February 12th. There were further meetings. A few of them were upstate in New York.
Okay.
So it was an opportunity to get these principals together where they could start moving on the bureaucratic efforts needed to prepare for contact.
Mm-hmm. There were efforts made to debunk and discount both O'Hare and Stephenville, Texas, that are still available. They're out there. It's strange how they do these things. One step forward, one step back, or half step back.
Right.
They'll debunk their own stuff. It's how they drag the people slowly in the direction they want them to go.
That is for another time, but that's called the core story. And many of the NID scientists and some of the others, people very close to this research, realize that there's a core story. In other words, memes, disinformation, misinformation melted together with the truth in order to acclimate and move the public into a particular direction.
There it is. Okay. All right, very good. So we have the UN meeting. It did happen. Do we have documentation on that?
No way. We don't have any type of documentation.
Right. It wouldn't be a successful meeting if there was documentation on it. I get it. I understand what you're saying.
Keep this in mind too, Jeff. I envy George Knapp, that at least with Bob Lazar, he had a civilian, and there was a lot of loose ends. The Los Alamos, the phone book, his naval W-2 form. So that's a civilian. It's hard to cover up. I think it's maybe much more difficult to cover up the civilian sector. But in the military, forget it.
Right.
Forget it.
No, I remember.
Especially when you got a guy.
Yeah.
But you're dealing with an analog guy. Our guy's analog. His records have been swept up long ago. He was black all the way back in Vietnam. So it's so difficult or almost virtually impossible to track them that even if you could track them, I'll go one better. Mm-hmm. You have a nice big fire in St. Louis in 1972, 73 that gets rid of half those records. Right before the church and pike herons. So what I'm saying is that these guys gotten quite good. I remember Rich would say this. He said they gotten quite good of learning from mistakes to be able to make sure that they could keep fail-safe contingencies in place so that nothing gets compromised.
Define fail-safe for our audience. Define fail-safe as it's used here.
Fail-safe
basically,
is that,
it's a parallel construction of lies. lives, like Rich has his IT life, his life never in the military, and then he has his other life, which was in the military. And so they create markers, incidents, pure evidence, records where everything you say that you're connected to the military gets debunked. And that happens when a program gets compromised and they go into what they call fail-safe, where
they have to build themselves an out, and that's it. I got it. I understand.
Well, you know when that out was first built when we met our source, the day we met him. Think about that. So, as soon as we got vetted, at that point, fail-safe began. Keep that in mind. That's how this works. That's how this works.
At any time, it's all gone. It's gone. Just gone. There have been many instances of records, massive, critically important government records being destroyed. We have the 9/11, the Pentagon. We have the Muir building. We have the St. Louis fire. We've had other strange fires as well. And what they do is when things get to the point of being too sticky, they just burn them up or destroy them. And now it's all digital. See, that's back in the day when there was still paper. Anyway.
But digital, as you well know, is much harder to conceal, especially with the WikiLeaks, with Julian Assange. It's getting tenuous.
Yeah.
And it's really, 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 really getting difficult.
So they're going to go back to paper. Is that what you're saying?
Well, listen.
That's
I don't
funny.
want to go back to paper, but the smart thing is maybe. Well, it's like I saw, and it's an aside. Jeff? You've seen the John Wick series?
No.
With Keanu Reeves. Well, if you watch number 2,
this is TV.
No, that's a movie. Your listeners definitely will love John Wick. He's a great action hero. Keanu Reeves is one of the best out there. So, and listen, he's fun to watch. But anyhow, it's a good storyline. Great, it's wonderful. But he's in Italy, and he's communicating with a very ultra secret organization of maybe assassins and people that need to be gotten rid of, and then they hire always these top guys to do it, right? But they don't communicate. It's interesting. They showed a communication system that wasn't digital. They showed the old vacuum tube, like where you plug in the like you plug into the wall. Yeah, so that's how. In other words, they were communicating through an antiquated system to
like actually, 1930s and 1940s radios.
Yeah, think of it. Isn't that brilliant? Now, wait. Remember that recent thing that came up about? Oh God, what was it? Communication with the. I don't know, maybe it was a Fusion GPS that came up in England with a particular diplomat here, Democratic diplomat here in, the name escapes me, but here in Washington, D.C. And what came up is that this woman went for her ham radio operator's license.
Uh-huh.
Now, does the NSA spend much money and time listening to ham radio operators?
Shortwave?
No.
No.
No, I mean, it's an antiquated system, so the money and the time and energy is not going there. So if you think about it, what a brilliant way to hide communication. By the way, I ran this by my Intel source. Yeah, but this is, sometimes it's like, hey, snail mail works. Sometimes it really works. So I think that's something we should consider.
Well, there's too much of a spectrum to monitor all the time, and from shortwave to ultra HD microbursts and encoded and all the rest of it. How are you going to monitor all of it? I guess you can with enough computers, but it's tough.
Who would ever think to monitor ham radios?
That's funny.
In this day and age.
Yeah.
Well, the whole metadata program is not about monitoring time and information in real time. It's about freezing everything that was ever said and sent until you have enough of a reason to approximate who did what, and you're able to retrieve the information. That's what the whole metadata program is out in Utah. It's everything said and done frozen in time.
Yeah, that's a huge amount of material. Wow. Okay.
That's a lot of information.
We got the UN meeting. All right.
With 2012, the UN meeting happens. 2016, we break it to Open Minds Forum, okay, about the meeting. There's a whole bunch of flack that happens.
And back up, Shawn. Yes, we did the Open Minds, but it was actually to Michael Sala and Robert Morningstar at UFO Digest, where the original stories went out to those two venues. Okay, and then it was a little bit later, not much later. Open Minds was brought into it. They had the best forum.
They received it February 16th, 2008. Okay, so the information goes out in Open Minds Forum. In addition to
what information are you talking about?
The UN meeting.
Okay. And Open Minds Forum for our listeners is what?
It's an internet forum where they talk about these issues like UFOs.
All right.
Okay.
It no longer exists, by the way. It actually, when we went into failsafe, not soon after that forum crashed and burned, which interestingly is, I don't really know what happened, but it happened soon after our guy went into failsafe. Go ahead, Shawn.
So on February 22nd, 2008, Richard goes back from a meeting out west in a secured, undisclosed military location, and it's not Area 51. At that point, he meets a silicon-based life form. They're in biosuits. He doesn't really know what he's looking at.
He's in a biosuit. He's in a facility out west. They're in a biosuit. All right. A silicon-based life form is in a biosuit. Right. Now, we're not talking about little grays or tall blondes or reptile types or insectoids. We're talking about a silicon carbon-based life form. All right.
He subsequently finds out that they're 85% silicon, 15% carbon.
Is he coming? Excuse me, I've got to step aside here just for a moment. Is he coming back and continually updating you guys on his life and times, or are these informational outbursts coming in packets here and there?
The way I understand it is that, go ahead, John.
Go ahead, Clay.
No, I want to back up here a second, okay? We got to back up because there's, like I said, Jeff, this is so much. After the UN meeting, he went upstate 4 or 5 times, okay, discussing disclosure issues with his foreign and domestic counterparts, okay? All right. There's a Chinese official across the table, and it got acrimonious. The Chinese official said, "You pay for it."
Meaning you pay for it. Meaning
disclosure.
You're gonna take the heat for disclosing the reality.
Yeah, you got it. You're 100% correct. In other words, you're the guys that kept the secrets, and you got to take the heat.
Well, that makes diplomatic.
That actually happens. Yeah. That actually happens in the March April time frame. Okay?
It makes perfect sense to me. Okay.
So now we got to back up.
Goes up.
Go ahead, Clay.
Okay, so he 4 or 5 times, they went upstate New York and they had that. Now the Russian, he actually got along very well with the Russian, okay, because the Russian doesn't like the Chinese. They don't like the Chinese, and when he basically told them to F off, and literally they stood up and they went face to face, and Rick said, "Hey, listen, I was out of bounds. I was really pissed off. I apologize." He apologized. We sat down. We continued, but I think that was it for Rich in the diplomatic end of the disclosure process, because he was subsequently moved into another program, which Shawn just broached. Okay.
Yeah, but
before we go there, remember, Rich was tasked to go to certain European nations. Remember, and talk about the disclosure initiative. Remember that, Shawn?
Okay, I'm going to get to that. Okay, so
okay, all right, then I'm getting ahead of myself. All right.
Yeah, you're getting a little ahead of yourself. 12/22/08, he goes to an unsecured location and he interfaces with these things. He doesn't know what he's looking at. He sees this thing, an undulating blob of Play-Doh in Battleship Gray. He doesn't know that's the biosuit. He sees what he thinks is some sort of appendage underneath it, kind of bumping up. through the biosuit, but he really doesn't know what he's looking at.
Is there a helmet on this suit?
No. It looks like a blob of Play-Doh.
All right.
Okay? But he doesn't see that. What he sees initially, he's entrained to see some sort of diplomatic official. And he sees this diplomatic official, which he looks at as if some assistant undersecretary of state, and that entrainment ends after 3 or 4 minutes, and the thing turns into this Play-Doh thing. So they're able to entrain an image for a very short period of time onto the viewers, and each person in the room saw something slightly different. They didn't say it was what Rich said.
Who is controlling the implant of the visual cortex in the brain? Who was doing it?
The
item in the suit. Okay.
The ET itself was able to entrain onto the viewers exactly what that viewer thinks they wanted to see.
Okay.
But they could only
it's
do
like
it
a psychic projection. Yeah.
Okay. And then
exactly.
When that ends, he sees what he sees. Now, I got the initial email from him saying, I don't know what I'm looking at. I don't know what this is. So it's not like he said, it's this, this, and this. He goes, I don't know what I'm.
Now, you say you got an email from him?
Correct.
Okay, why is he emailing something of above top secret nature?
Who says it's
not classified? No.
Why
That's
not?
The whole point.
First of all, who's going to?
Why would it be? Now you create a paper trail.
Okay. Who would believe it, I guess, is the bottom line.
Exactly, Jeff. First of all, who would believe it? Exactly.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. So that happens. In late February into early March, Rich then makes a trip to Europe. He goes to Spain, France, Great Britain, Italy, Germany, parts of North Africa, and the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
The subject is support and fallout from unambiguous contact for these societies. He then attends from the 19th to the 21st of May 3 meetings in upstate.
Okay, good. John.
Which
That's right.
he had the fallout with the Chinese counterpart. They said they want the U.S. to pay for any damages due to the result of unambiguous contact. Rich actually chaired that meeting.
Well, actually, disclosure in unambiguous contact. So it was one. It was kind of all is a.
I don't have that in the emails. I have unambiguous contact, which means ships over the cities. Okay, so that happened. From those meetings in Catskills happened from the 19th to 21st of May. After that happened, he got moved into another program.
Okay.
Okay. That program was an off-world program.
Was a what?
Off-world program.
Okay. All right. You heard right. I just want to make sure people heard that. He got moved into an off-world program. In other words,
correct.
He was going out there. Now, let me do something
not our technology.
I got it.
Not
all right.
our technology. Gotcha.
I got you. Okay. Henry Kissinger said something in 1991 that merits repeating here, and I mentioned it the other night at a Bilderberg meeting. And he said, today, he's talking about one world government. He said, today, America would be outraged if United Nations troops entered Los Angeles to restore order. Tomorrow, they will be grateful. This is especially true if they were told that there were an outside threat from beyond, i.e., an extraterrestrial invasion, whether real or promulgated, that threatened our very existence. It is then that all peoples of the world will plead to deliver them from this evil. The one thing every man fears is the unknown. When presented with this scenario, let me finish, almost done. Individual rights will be willingly relinquished for the guarantee of their well-being granted to them by the world government, end quote. True, not true?
It's something that Clay and I thought about exhaustively, that it could be, this information could be used for that purpose. I mean, if you don't monitor that, we were very well aware of that quote.
Of course, everybody in the field is. Yeah, a lot of people listening aren't.
Well,
all right.
Sure.
Let me bring this up. Fletcher Prouty wrote years ago in The Secret Team, in his writings, the late Fletcher Prouty, which is his research is just fantastic.
He was on the program here many times over the years. Yeah.
Oh, okay, good, Jeff. And I'm not surprised. But Fletcher Prouty wrote that one of the bureaucratic changes they made to the military was to call the War Department, or Department of War, the Department of Defense.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
And in that semantical phrase laid the groundwork for the bureaucrats, okay, or for the control to be put in place in emerging technological complex societies. This is why John Alexander is correct, Colonel John Alexander, is that in order to get the funding for the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, is that they had to call it a threat in order to get that funding.
National
because,
defense,
said,
national security. I get it.
So you got it. So that is how funding is put into place. And, the sine qua non, or, the big enchilada of funding is 9/11, right?
Mm-hmm.
It put it all in place. You put all those bureaucracies in place. You put the structure in place, the infrastructure and everything that entails full spectrum control. Wow, that's interesting. Now you start talking about contact, disclosure. You start talking about contact. I have to ask yourself, and I've often speculated, what was this program really about? Was there ostensibly another program in play that was the real design for the war on terror? And that's just a question, John. Jeff. I'm wondering about that. So, Shawn, you can elaborate if you'd like on that.
We have, just so you know, we have 2 minutes for this time. Okay, then next Tuesday, we'll pick it up right here.
Okay, so we're at the point at which he gets into this quote unquote off-world program, which at the beginning of your statement, at the beginning of the interview, you mentioned broadband, people like that. Jeff, that was very painful for us. First of all, we were maligned. We were harassed. Someone we cared about deeply, Richard, his life was destroyed. He got nothing out of this.
Mm-hmm. Well, his name was kicked around like a soccer ball. Yeah.
Exactly.
No,
so when you mention those names, that's painful.
Well, he obviously became a problem for his superiors as well. This didn't go over right, or did it? Did they expect this, or did they not? That's a tough question.
Well, that is a tough question. I think that the Navy didn't like it at all, but the power structure said, hey, fail-safe is fail-safe, and he had a lot of autonomy, and it blew up. So now it's damage control, protect the program, no more digging. That's for the next show. We'll talk about that. But he did not benefit. So for people to say a fraud, call him a fraud, and say, what did he get out of it? If people only knew what his present state right now, they would be, I think some of those guys that exposed him would be quite ashamed, I got to tell you.
Well, I hope they didn't do to him what they did to Clark McClelland and strip away all of his government pensions and support and everything, because what we're going to hear next week is...
that's excellent. That's an excellent point. I don't know what's going to happen in terms of that, but I know that Rich is in a place right now where he's very, very, very happy. And he lives the simplest.
That's priceless. I'm glad to hear that. That's great news. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's off the grid.
Very nice.
And he's happy.
Well, good.
So he said this, Jeff. He said, I spent my whole life in the military learning how to survive, and I know how to do it, and he does. And we decided after this point, we kept our mouth shut, and we're not going to name names or places, and we're going to be very careful. We want this program to move forward, and Well, but I think it's time to talk a little bit more openly about that program and what's ahead, because it's not going to go away.
No, I get that's the big thing.
It's not going to go away.
We've turned a corner. We've walked through a door. We're not going to go back. At least that's the way it looks to me as well. You know, perhaps more than I do, but you were given, and this is my last question. What kind of green lights to do this stuff, to come back into the public eye? Can you tell me? I don't want names. I mean, just in general. You got clear signals? Were they ambiguous? Are you taking a risk? How does it work?
Well, I gotta quote Shakespeare. Shakespeare said in Twelfth Night, "O time, untie this knot, not I, for it is a knot too hard for me to untie." Time passed. 7 years passed.
Almost 8.
It's pretty much as simple as that.
All right, very good. Well, we will pick this up, and we're going to bring the whole story out, the rest of it, next week. If we need more time, we'll do that as well. I do want it memorialized here, so there's no mistaking any of it. If you do other shorter venues, you'll never be able to cover this as it should be, and we're going to get it done here so it's full and complete. And then we'll spin it off. You take it wherever you want, but I want to make sure we have it all down. And thank you very much for being here. Excellent presentation. I think we walked through it at the speed that it required and warranted and deserves, and I think people have a good grasp on it, especially after gripping what William Tompkins said, Bill, in all those interviews. And so we'll talk to you next Tuesday, gentlemen.
Sounds
Thank
good
you.
to me.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Excellent.
All right. Good night.
Thank you, Jeff.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night, brother.
Clay and Shawn Pickering. And we will rejoin you in 21 hours tomorrow night.